Living in Australia has become borderline impossible. Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide are all in the top 10 of most least affordable housing markets in the world, and Sydney coming in at second, only behind the tiny island of Hong Kong. So in today's video, it's been a while since I've given an update on Australia's economy, but we really need to talk about what's happening in Australia, because Australia could be the model for the rest of the world, wherever you're watching right now. In the US, if you're watching from the UK, if you're watching from Europe, wherever you're watching from, you could see just how bad things could really get. And also, the second behind us, Canada, I'm sure you guys know how it is as well. So I'm going to go over what's been a big issue here in Australia, and how the government isn't doing anything about it. They're making the problem worse by, when we have the worst housing crisis we've ever had in history, we've got immigration at record levels. So they're pumping this housing market as much as they can, and Australia's economy on an individual basis, not the creative accounting figures they do for GDP, but if you look on the individual basis per capita, that means per person, we are in the longest recession since the 1990 Great Recession. So everyone, let's not waste any time. Let's get straight into the news, the facts, and the data, we would say, in Australia. So look at this, everyone. Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide are at the top 10 least affordable cities for housing. So this was released in a report of 94 major markets. 5 Australian cities were assessed, 3 ranked impossibly unaffordable. So that's right, it's not clickbait. It's becoming impossible to live the Australian dream on an average income these days. So also Perth and Brisbane are severely unaffordable as well. So let's dive a bit deeper into this report, and I've got much more. This is going to be a very comprehensive coverage of what's happening in Australia at the moment. So Australian capitals are among the least affordable in the world for middle income buyers. So the research, which assessed housing markets in 94 cities, 8 countries, found that almost all Australian capitals fell into the bottom 25% in terms of affordability. So in global context, Sydney is the second least affordable city, followed by Hong Kong, while Melbourne and Adelaide also rank extremely low in affordability among these cities that were analysed. So what's creating this problem? Well, policies limiting urban growth are highlighted as major contributors to high housing prices, along with slow wage growth. Now, why do we have slow wage growth? Well, I'll get into that in a minute. But obviously, if you have a whole bunch more labor come into the country that's willing to work for lower wages, that's going to keep, it's going to reduce wages, or it's going to keep a lid on wages, but it's going to increase demand for housing and essential services. So the Australian federal government is responding to the housing crisis with a $34 billion initiative aimed at increasing housing supply and providing relief for renters. But unfortunately, it's not going to come quick enough. So this annual report assesses housing affordability in Australia, Canada, China, Ireland, New Zealand, Singapore, UK, and the US. Topping the list of most unaffordable cities, like I said, was Hong Kong, and Melbourne came in at number 7. So the first thing we need to understand why Australia is becoming impossible to live here is because housing is so expensive. And on top of that, unlike in the US, where you guys during COVID probably got a really good interest rate of around 3% and locked that in for 30 years, here in Australia, the max you can lock your interest rate in is for 5 years, same in Canada. And after that, interest rates will go back to whatever the market is right now. And so for a lot of people in Australia, during COVID, you could get mortgage rates below 2%. But now those interest rates are more like 7 or 8%, and people's mortgages have doubled, and now this is having a huge effect on the economy, which let's get into now. So look, Australia's economic problems have been brewing for years. And like I said before, this isn't clickbait. We're in the most prolonged downturn since the 1991 recession, and it's time for a Treasury to do something about it. So that's exactly right. Nothing's really being done to fix the fundamental issues of how bad the economy is in Australia right now. And I'll also get in and show you in a moment of how unproductive the Australian economy is and the workforce at the moment. So labour productivity has failed to improve since 2016. Business investment is close to 1990 levels, and there has been no serious economic reform. Undisciplined government spending after too much stimulus during the pandemic, the Reserve Bank of Australia has been forced to push up interest rates to grind household and business activity to a halt to bring inflation under control. So that's exactly right. And just to show you how bad things really are for Australia's productivity, you may be thinking, well, what's this got to do? Well, if productivity is not going up, your wages aren't going up. And this shocking graph shows dramatic fall-off in Australia labour productivity. So look at this. I actually got it up here. We can see, where is Australia ranked against all these advanced economies? That's right, we are dead last over here. So we have Poland, they're growing over 4%. The United States growing nearly 3%. Norway, Greece, okay. Out of the other countries, Germany's following, New Zealand, Canada, Israel, Japan, but us, we are falling at a massive, massive pace. And Australia is in big, big trouble if things like this don't improve, because if our productivity doesn't go up, your wages won't go up, but the cost of everything else is going up. So as a result of this, economic growth has slowed to just 0.8% through the year to September. But in a per person terms, the economy has been shrinking for almost 2 years for adjusting for population growth. So that's exactly right. You can't just look at the headline GDP number and say, well, we're not in a recession. The reason we're not in a recession is because of inflation, everything going up, and also because of the unprecedented amount of immigration, and I'll get into later the unprecedented amount of government spending. The government is spending like there's no tomorrow, and they're spending crazily irresponsible. So let's keep reading here. So the soft-hearted wanted to take the easy path and blame the RBA. The hard-headed know that this problem has been brewing in Canberra over multiple governments under Liberal and Labor Prime Ministers and Treasurers. So that's right. We have a two-party system here, and unfortunately, we don't have many options, and both of them haven't been doing good for a long time. So let's keep reading here. But in Canberra, it's been all buck passing and blame shifting. Labor is trying to deal with symptoms of inflation and declining living standards, but the costs of living handouts do not treat the underlying cause of the problem. The political class is increasingly sees every problem as a distributional issue rather than poor fundamentals. And that's exactly right. We'll get into the fundamentals of how advanced the Australian economy is. And for many of you that don't do your research, you may be shocked on how uncomplex the Australian economy is. So to make matters worse, the massive spending by federal and state government is now in direct conflict with the RBA. So that's right, the RBA has been lifting interest rates. It's been smashing households. They've lifted interest rates up to 4.35%, but at the same time, this Labor government has increased government spending to record levels. So they've got their foot on the brake, the RBA, and Labor's got their foot on the accelerator. And we can look at this chart here, real household disposable income per capita. We can see here, it went up during COVID because everyone got their stimulus checks. A lot of people withdrew their super, which are taking money from their future and their retirement. And we can see ever since September 2023, it has been declining. And it hasn't really improved since March 2018, but house prices and the cost of everything has massively gone up. So the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, has dropped the precedence that fiscal and monetary policy are working in the same direction. He now says that the record government spending is propping up the economy to save it from technical recession. Now, that is true. It is saving it from technical recession, but it's coming at a cost. So while the government wants to avoid the economy going backwards, the extra dollars it is spending will inevitably prolong the inflation pain and elevated interest rates. So that's right. Unfortunately, for people with a mortgage, because of all the amount of spending that the Labor government's doing, it's not weakening the economy or bringing the costs down, which really the RBA can't stop if the Labor government is spending. But it means for mortgage holders, your interest costs are going to stay high for longer. So now, obviously, they didn't cause the problem. They put the blame here on the Morrison government, backed by Labor and the RBA, the lockdowns, the border closures, supply chain disruptions. But we know that they haven't made things any better. Now, he's being classed as, Australia has a nickname, the lucky country. Well, he's being called the lucky treasurer. Economist Chris Richardson says Chalmers has been the luckiest treasurer in history, but there has been no real restraint on spending. So Chalmers' budgets have added 60 billion extra in net discretionary spending, and the budgets have contained 104 billion in new spending decisions, but raised only 44 billion in extra revenue to pay for it. So that's generous calculations because it includes billions in theoretical revenue from new superannuation tax and retirement saving balances above 3 million that's unlikely to pass Parliament. This is why, it's so scary about superannuation, because who knows, by the time you get to retire, they could change the age to 75 years old. They could start taxing you, the same rate. Who knows what could happen? That's why it's so uncertain about super. And why Australians are so worried about their future, because it seems like it's become a piggy bank now for politicians. Now, this is what I was talking about, how crazy government spending has gotten. So look at this chart here. I'll make it a bit bigger so you can see a bit easier. Government spending share of GDP. So state government and federal government, their spending is accounting for a massive 29% of nominal GDP. This is extraordinary. A third of GDP is coming from just the government spending money. Now we can see here high spending on the NDIS, nearly 50 billion, has pushed the cost of everything up. And now you have, the private sector trying to compete with the public sector for jobs. And this is what's, dampening productivity, and it's really going to keep prices up if the government keeps spending like this. Inflation is going to stay high for longer. Now, obviously, Australians need it. I'm not saying they don't need it, but sometimes you need to let things correct on their own. You need to let the market do its thing and let fundamentals do its thing, and not try to prop up things forever and keep on an infinite economic growth trajectory. It's just simply unsustainable. So we'll keep on reading here. So the fundamental problem was laid out in the McKenzie report presented to the company chairman and chief executive this week. Australia has coasted on easy gains from the mining boom and high immigration. Labour productivity growth has been virtually zero since 2016 and has slumped to 30th out of the 35 rich countries. So that is shocking, guys. We're 30th out of 35. Now, also, I want to show you something else. Australia's economic complexity. So Australia is actually ranked 93rd out of 103 countries. This shows how diverse and resilient the Australian economy is. And unfortunately in Australia, our economy is not that complex. We rely on booming house prices to turn your house into an ATM. We rely on our resources, which we sell off to other countries, let them come in and buy up all our resources, and we pay higher prices. And we rely on mass immigration and international students. So Australia's ranking indicates it has less economic complexity compared to other countries and is over-reliant on exporting low-complexity items. So Australia's reliance on raw materials like coal and iron ore makes it vulnerable to external shocks, such as supply chain disruptions and commodity price volatility. That's right, we also rely heavily on China, and now the US is about to get into another tariff war with China, which is going to weaken their growth, which is going to weaken our growth. So some say that Australia's future economic success will depend on its ability to value add rather than simply mining, digging, growing, and shipping. And that's exactly right, everyone. We need to diversify our economy, get rid of all the red tape, get rid of the nanny state that the government is, where they try to make it impossible for you to get ahead. It's so hard to start a business here in Australia. And then once you do start to get a bit of success, it's like, oh, what's this guy doing over here? Is he doing something innovative? Well, let's create some new laws and let's create some new legislation to stop that and put it all in our mate's pocket. So we'll keep on reading here. So we can see here Labour Productivity Index. Again, we've saw that. That's been falling. So it says here, in other words, the government and businesses need to drive larger than usual productivity gains in the private sector to offset the expanding non-market economy, but it's not happening while private sector productivity is now growing at just below pre-pandemic levels. So this is creating election cannon fodder. So Peter Dutton, the opposition and shadow treasurer, has obviously gone on the attack this week and said that we're paying the price for Labor's big government and big Australia policies, and Taylor is economically literate to diagnose the problems, but the coalition is yet to roll out meaningful policies to fix the challenges next week. It'll unveil a big taxpayer gamble on nuclear energy. Now, Australia's over-dependency on growth in inhibiting taxes on personal income and non-mining corporate profits has repeatedly been called out by the International Monetary Fund and OECD and former Treasury Secretary. Overhauling tax and workplace relations, fixing the energy system's mess, and competition and less stifling red tape should form the basis of a modern reform agenda. So that's right, we do need massive economic reform. Because look at this, the number of restrictive clauses in federal law, including shall, must, may not, required, and prohibited, has surged 50% since 2007, which again, I'm calling out, Australia has become a nanny state. Now, could the cost of living crisis get any better? We've got this news out today. Embarrassing numbers, Albanese's government likely to miss immigration reduction target. So it was a decline of just 12% in the first 4 months of the year, put the dramatic 40% goal out of reach. So to put it very, very simply, everyone, the reason why it's becoming so impossible to live in Australia is because the overregulation, because of mass immigration when we have the worst housing crisis in history and some of the most expensive real estate in the world, and we're not innovating, we're not getting more productive, we are lagging behind massively. And Australia has relied on its luck, its resources, it's relied on China to get out of the economic problems it's had in the past, but we're not going to be able to keep on doing this forever. But everyone, what do you think about this? What issues are you seeing right now? Let me know down below. Now, for all my loyal viewers and subscribers still watching, you're awesome. Thanks for watching. I'll see you all in the next video.